The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
How did you become a Bills fan?
I grew up north of Coburg, and we didn't have cable. Cable didn't extend that far. So over-the-air television's all we got, and a lot of that came out of Buffalo. So got a lot of Bills coverage. And just, I grew up predominantly a baseball guy. Hockey was second, but then a football game was on TV, and I thought, I'm going to try to figure out what exactly is going on here. And so it was about 1988. The Bills were just about to start to get on the uptick, but the first moment, I would suggest, was I watched live coverage of Jim Kelly arriving in Buffalo. And that's kind of, I don't know, they made it seem like a big deal, and so I thought it was a big deal, and that was the embryonic stages of me becoming a Bills fan.
What a great moment. 1986,
I believe.
1986, and the Kelly is God banners were out, and the USFL is disbanded. And yeah, if you're a Bills fan, that was a big moment.
It was. And then it all came full circle for me a few years ago at a CRS event. Black River Entertainment's owned by Terry Pagula. And Kelsey Ballerini being the flagship artist, her single at the time was called Legends. So a few of us go over to the event, and what do? They trot out Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas at the beginning of the event. And Kopnick, myself, Gelfand, we're just going out of our mind. And then at the end, everybody got a few minutes to go say hi to Jim and to Thurman and to Kelsey. And so in that moment, I said to Jim Kelly, I remember watching live coverage of your airplane landing in Buffalo, and I was about 11 years old, turning 12. And he said, I barely even remember that.
That's great.
Yeah, it was fun.
Have you always grown up in the Belleville region?
I grew up about an hour from here, but my radio for me has almost always been in this market, and I know it's a bit of a unicorn situation. And I knew the fork in the road decision was coming. I'm either going to settle and have a family, and maybe this business bleeds out for me, or I'm going to do the up and down the dial thing. And it's worked out both ways in a sense, not the up and down the dial, but here I am still in the business. So I'm about an hour from where I grew up and basically put roots down here.
Tell me about the market.
Belleville is, in a radio sense, it's like it's in this little comfortable incubator in that our company's privately owned, our competition is privately owned, and there is no corporate ownership at all. And so there's no Bell, no Rogers, no Chorus, no Stingray. It's two privately owned companies still largely operating in the way radio's always operated. We have newsrooms, we have our own traffic departments, we have our own creative. And so it's strange in a way because I don't know of another market in the country of this size that doesn't have any corporate ownership.
I'm checking to say that perhaps Thunder Bay might be one.
Maybe. And in fact, I think somebody else has pointed that out. Yeah, I think you're right. Thunder Bay may be in the exact same situation. And that might be the only other example of a market that doesn't, have corporate ownership. And that comes with its advantages, and it comes with its disadvantages too. But Belleville as a market is, radio's still pretty healthy in terms of the region itself. We're, an hour and a half out of Toronto, 2.5 out of Ottawa, 3 out of Montreal. The disadvantage to that is you're not close to any particular airport.
Yeah.
But lifestyle-wise, it's awesome.
Do you talk to your competition a lot to try to solve some problems, whether it's locally or with radio, or how to do things, or do you guys keep to yourselves?
I wouldn't say we keep to ourselves. There's a mutual respect there. And, do we talk trade a lot on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis? Not necessarily. But that said, we're both certainly very much interested in keeping radio alive and healthy in this market because we feel it's a good radio market. we'll fight it out for, listenership and dollars on the street. But yeah, we both like the fact that it's a very healthy radio market.
Is it a race to local?
Yes, I think so. Both content wise and advertising wise. It's, and in particular from a news standpoint, they have 3 stations, 2 FMs and an AM, very heavily invested in news. We have 2 FMs. We're pretty invested in news, and their newsroom's a little larger than ours. But that said, pound for pound, the market's very well covered. So yeah, it's a race to local. And really what it does is all ships get raised in that high tide. I think the market's very well served.
Give me the history of Starboard Communications.
Okay. It goes back to Starboard was established Labor Day weekend 2002. That's when the Sherratt family bought what was then Belleville Radio Limited from a guy named Tony Zwig. And so the sale closed and the Sherratts were here in September 2002. And it wasn't just an arm's reach situation. The Sherratts moved their family here. And they had spent their lives in Toronto for the most part up to this point. But they knew it was important. If we're going to operate radio stations locally, I'm stealing this line, I think, from John Wright. But when it rained in Belleville, the ownership's head had to get wet. And they understood that. And so their kids were young at the time. Family moves down, and they made it a big priority to be integrated in the community. And so at the time, CJOJ-FM had been established for a number of years. CHCQ, which is our country property, it had only been on the air about a year. In fact, maybe just under a year. So that property was still growing. And they knew at the time a heavy investment was going to have to be made in infrastructure, new equipment, the whole thing. And they put that investment in. And so slowly but surely, the radio stations improved, the staff grew, and here we are today. That's the very short version of the history of Starboard. One of the things that I think the Sherratts did that was really smart in terms of establishing the fact that new ownerships here, we're going to be local and we're serious. Sponsorship availabilities were available for the Belleville Waterfront Festival. So you could buy sponsorship of the Midway or the food tent or the this or the that. They went to the top of the rate card and they bought the sponsorship of the entire festival. And it was the most expensive sponsorship available. But it's like, if we're going to be noticed and we're going to be taken seriously, then we're going all in. And that was one of the first moves they made from a marketing standpoint.
You touched on news carefully there and local, but I think that's kind of obvious. I think if you ask somebody local, what do you want in a radio station? That's what they'll say. But what else do people really care about? What do you hear from your listeners?
Well, I think people, obviously they choose their radio station largely based on the music they want to hear. But what we hear pretty regularly, what gets the most reaction, are the most human pieces of content. When our air staff really puts themselves out there in a real way, that's what generates the most interaction. For example, one of our morning guys, and this was maybe 3 years ago, he was driving into work and coming down Walbridge Loyalist Road. There was an abandoned kids John Deere, those rideable toys that we all wanted. The guy finds one on the side of the road, abandoned. And so he brings it to work. And what his idea is let's restore this thing to working order and auction it off for the United Way. And the traction that bit got, we ended up getting a John Deere dealership to say, we'll try to restore that for you. And if we can't, we're going to give you a new one to auction off for the United Way. And so that's the type of stuff that we get the best reaction out of. And when we get feedback about the radio stations, when there's compelling conversation, that's what we hear the most about.
What about the way you sell the station? For years, we've done 30s. When, you mentioned the chorus, the Rogers and the Bells, they come with a little bit, they've got other ways that they'll sell it too. But when it's just you guys, what can you sell beyond the 30?
That is a great question. And we still do sell 30s and 15s, and, some clients want 60s. But we're working towards being more innovative. And I think just in radio in general, that's something that we're all looking towards. So we have, and this ties back to the local news element. Years ago, 10 years ago, we established a pretty robust news website. And to be fair, our competitors have one as well, inquinty.ca. And we thought, we don't want this just to be somewhere where we cut and paste radio news onto a website. We want this to be as robust as what maybe a newspaper would put together. So we invested heavily in that. That became saleable. And it's been quite a success, both editorially and on the business side. We also are, we'll sell social content. We're looking into other ways to monetize the radio products, not only terrestrially, but with our stream. What can we do to make money off the stream with digital ad insertion and such? So we don't have the national scale that some of those other folks have. We're working to be more innovative with what we do have on our lap, in addition to 30s and 15s.
Yeah, so I really, really love the news website, the news idea. A lot of people, it's not the only one that I've talked about on this show. I believe I talked about something called 716 in Wisconsin, which was, now I'm trying to remember the area. Maybe it wasn't Wausau. Anyways, it was whatever one of those wonderful places is on my way to the Green Bay Packers games, right? So, but to have that, you've got a website, and I'm not sure if you have a newsletter that may go along with it. But because you have tools like that, you can sort of fly below the radar of a Bill C11 or C18, and just drive people to the website, and lo and behold, there's your local news.
Right. And we do have a newsletter that goes out every day at the end of the day. It's kind of got the 5 things you need to know if you happen to miss the news. We also have, and we're really proud of this, it goes out Saturday morning, 8 a.m., and it's called Good News in Quinte. And the idea was born over the course of the pandemic, when so much of the news, and it's just an ongoing thing, so much of the news is heavy. And yes, we have to report on that. It's important stuff. But what we do every Saturday morning is aggregate all of the positive news out of the community that we are able to report on. And it gets blasted out Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. And we hit it head on. Not all the news you hear is great, but there is good news. And you can subscribe for free, and it arrives on Saturday morning, with the idea being pour your coffee and read what's good in your community.
I love Saturday mornings in a smaller market. It's probably your most listened to time of the week. A lot of people don't talk about that. It's not 8:15 during the week. It's Saturdays.
No, that's an interesting point. And I would love to be able to flash charts and graphs, and I'm sure I could if I had them at but I also agree that's AAA time. Saturday morning.
It's high sampling.
Yep, you bet.
Right. So all the people who had to get up early, who couldn't listen to your morning radio show because they had to be at work early, want to get stuff done on a Saturday, sleep until 8, 9, and it's high traffic listening.
Sure.
Great time to be out there live on the radio, whether it's remotes and whatnot, and a great time to put out your newsletter, as you mentioned. And here's something else I noticed about the news website, inquinty.ca. It's not cluttered. It's not, yes, there's sponsorships up there, but it doesn't look like a mess. So how do you find people who are smart like that to make it look neat? Because I would make it look like a mess.
Well,
messy. That
version of inquinty.ca that if you load up right now is the 3rd iteration of the site. And I appreciate your observation on that, because that is 100% the objective. We don't want the radio stations to sound necessarily like a NASCAR looks. And we also don't want that news website to look like a NASCAR. The previous version of inquinty.ca we felt had too much white space. And so the way it's built now, much more streamlined with the tiles. And, the ads are there, but they're not intrusive. And that is by design. And to be fair to you, where you say you may make it look like a bit of a mess, the first couple of versions we had of that were not necessarily perfect, and that's okay. We'll acknowledge that. They were successful, but we, wasn't necessarily broken, but we thought, a little too much white space, and maybe if we did this in a more streamlined manner. And the version that we have right now, we did have a local company do the design for that for us.
I feel also that because you've got a nice website and you've got some other tools set up, I don't feel pressured as much to lean on social to get the word out, other than to promote what's on the website, right? I'm not even sure how much social you do. I know a lot of radio stations have backed off X. You can't be on Facebook necessarily now with Bill C-11 still kicking about. That's
right.
That's dead and buried for a lot of media properties. But do you feel it feels kind of nice to not have to worry so much about social, other than just driving people to your website?
Well, and that's and of course C-11 made that tougher for sure, and we did see decline in numbers, because we can't share the news on social media. That was a massive driver of the traffic to that website. So I guess what it became was, and you're right, we were never terribly heavily invested in X or Twitter previously, but it's what can you do with what you have? And there are ways, we do that by way of news on the radio, where we can maybe make a news story a little tighter on the radio and have our anchor say, for more information and photos, go to inquini.ca. And so we do everything else we can, and we're not perfect at it. I'm sure there's more we could do to direct people to the website. It's interesting with C-11. It goes to show you, that we maybe should invest heavier and focus more on platforms we own and control, and not leave so much up to stuff that can go poof on you.
Yeah, actually, I remember there was a radio company in 2016 said, it might have been 20, no, it was 20. There was a radio company in 2008 said, don't bother getting on Facebook. We're going to make our own platform, which was laughable at the time for the people at CBS who did it. And of course, everybody joined Facebook. But I think this is a good example. And I think for Canada itself, I know there's been talk of a Canadian-only social media platform just built for this particular purpose.
I'd love that.
Yeah, so that's in the works.
I would love
that.
In
the works. Yeah, no, me too. What's the role of voice tracking on your station? And by the way, in terms of like maybe people from outside who are not local, would you have any of that?
We don't at the moment. We have had in the past. Because again, we're not different than any other broadcaster. We're trying to do more with less. That's just the way it is. We are surprisingly live. In that morning shows are live. There would be some recorded hours through the day. Generally speaking, like on PM Drive on Cool 100, I'm live every day. And that's important to me. The phone right there, it still rings.
Yeah, you're 2 to 6, right?
Yeah, 2 to 6. And maybe I'm the youngest of the old guys, but I still believe we shouldn't sharpen the knife that we're going to put in our own back. In other words, if there's a perception that there's not live people on the radio, don't prove their point by having no one answer the phone. Now, not everybody's in a situation where they can do that. So again, what can you do with what you have? If the phone rings, can you forward that thing to some human in the building? Now, in my case, again, if somebody calls, and believe it or not, still happens where we had an issue where a pedestrian had been struck by a vehicle maybe 2 weeks ago. And our news guy comes in, lets me know about it. We go on the radio and say, police are asking you to avoid this area because X, Y, and Z. Listener calls up maybe 5 minutes later and says, hey, by the way, that's now open because I live right beside where it happened. And son of a gun, I hate the idea of losing that connectivity to your community. And so the role of voice tracking, it augments We lean on it heavily on the weekends. I wouldn't lie to you on that. Um, and we're doing a little less of it on the weekends, only to take a bit of the pressure off the air staff who's responsible for it. But through the week, when the sun's up, we're as live as we can be. So we do voice tracking. Certainly be open to the idea of having voices from outside the market be a part of that. But if they're going to be, there's a responsibility on us to make sure that they're in a situation to do it well.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. It would be kind of hard for somebody to come in from away who wasn't plugged into the region at all, because the station is, there's an expectation of local and kind of living here.
Yeah, well, going back a number of years, we have a staff member who's since moved to the market and is here every day. Prior to that, she lived in Kitchener-Waterloo, and she would voice track. She had a studio in her home and would do middays and did an exceptional job of it. But what I did for her, and this was pre-social media, or certainly social media was in its infancy, where you could maybe keep an eye on an other community through social channels. Every week I would email her a list of what's going on in the community, not just events wise, but construction's going on over here, like just things she needed to know to be as entrenched in the community as she could be. So, again, social would make that easier today, but to me, if you're going to do it right.
Can you share a breakdown of the percentage of people who would listen terrestrially versus those who might tap in on your live stream, or maybe on an app if you're on an app?
I can't necessarily give you we have our streaming data, but in terms of extrapolating for this market specifically, what the ratio would be, there's an industry ratio that I've recently heard that's about 11-1, meaning for every listener you've got online, there'd be 11 on the terrestrial feed. I'm a bit of an analytical geek, as in addition to being a goof. So I love knowing data like that, because, I have a month-to-month eye on our streaming data, and I look at that year over year to see what are the, for, not to belabor the point, but let's say the month of June's tuning. I look at that against June last year, because in the month of June, people typically do the same things year to year. So that gives me a good idea of what's going on. And I kind of use that 11-1 ratio in my head.
Is there an app I can listen on? Are you on Radio Player Canada or anything like that?
We are on Radio Player, but we've got our own proprietary apps as well. And we, like any other radio station, will promote, download the app, But we kind of have started taking the messaging a little further and saying, give us a tile on your home screen, especially because your phone's probably just like mine, a million apps, you got folders, there's everything else. And then it's easy to forget what apps you have on your phone for that reason. And so we've started asking our audience to give a prime piece of real estate on that iPhone. And that isn't just a clever idea of mine. I would not take credit for it. I learned that at CRS down in Nashville this past year. Everybody promotes the app, but are you asking for that prime piece of real estate? And if someone's going to give it to you, give them a reason to want that app.
Yeah, so you go to a market, let's say Halifax, there are 18 radio stations you can punch in on your presets. And yes, you can probably get 18 on some of the newer model cars, but it's really only the first 6 that are going to really get the activity. And then we found out it's the exact same thing with your iPhone, is that I have 55 apps on my phone and I'm really only using 5 of them.
Right. And it's also muscle memory for your finger to go to where they are on your phone. Whether it's Instagram, I could almost hit Instagram on my phone and not look at the screen because, again, it's muscle memory. So
yeah, a lot of people don't want to do the little pull down and then the search.
Right.
I have to teach this to people all the time to do this.
Right. And again, not going to lie, that's not something that would come easily. I've recently learned to do that because I knew there was an app on my phone and I couldn't find it. And eventually I came across the search bar and solved the problem. But we're trying to, program people to give us that tile on their especially this time of year when people are traveling. They're on vacation and, we'll go on and tell people, take a bit of home with you on the road this summer. You can put the Cool 100 app on your home screen and stay in touch with what's going on at home while you're on the road.
Did you want me to cut that audio and send that to production for the promo?
Yeah, that might have been the greatest moment. The greatest moment of clarity I'll have all day.
Is there an app for inquinty.ca?
We're working on that. What we're doing, to make a long story longer, we're taking Inquinty and we're actually reformatting it again, for the fourth time. And we're doing that because then we don't have to rely on an outside service provider if we want to make changes. With that is going to come an app. And again, we are actually quite excited, looking forward to having that Inquinty app, because with the challenges of distributing your news on social and such, we figure this is going to be the best way we can go about making it even more readily available for people. Because again, fewer people go to the desktop to read Inquinty, not zero, but fewer than what use the phone. So when we have the app, we're going to be able to have people read the news on that app, and then we can put our station streams there as well and help cross-pollinate.
Still early for me to bring this up and speculate. So by the time people listen to this, they'll have a better context of the issue. But I look at an app like that, and then the ability to push notifications out, at a level that's not quite at an Amber Alert level where we're going to make the phone bing at night. And then you see what happened in Kerwood, Texas. And I'm like, where was radio for this? I know it's 1:46 in the morning when this stuff is coming up. But, here's an opportunity to drop, accidents, local stuff. And there's a real shortage of that in Canada.
Maybe I'll lift that clip out of you, because you're absolutely on point with that. With this app, we'll be able to, a consumer will be able to enable push notifications, and, it will allow us just to, again, build our traffic, because we can put day-to-day news in a push notification. But for the reason you described, absolutely. If there's, summer traffic's always heavy on the 401, or if there's an accident on the 401 and it's Sunday afternoon at 4, we can jam a push notification out there really quickly.
Here's a dumb, crazy theory I'm going to throw at you. The lack of local news, and I'm talking across Canada, has led to distrust, which is why in the pandemic, you're going to get some dude go to your website, give you a 1-star Google review, say you're too far left-leaning, woke, whatever, organization, and then you say why, and they can't even tell you why. But that sort of distrust is really is there and talked about that way because of the lack of local news that is being fed. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree, because I've lived the experience in a couple of cases where, we used to have this commentary on the air, and the gentleman who had put that together for us, it was pretty thought-provoking, and it would evoke reaction in people, good, bad, indifferent. And so there was an instance, and I don't even recall but it was around pandemic time, and I don't recall what the specific column was about on the air. And so, but I get a phone call from a guy who believed his tax dollars were funding the radio station. And I said, whoa, that's not true. We're privately owned. We earn revenue through advertising. He didn't believe me. He said, I don't know about that. I said, I've been in this business a long time, and I'm pretty sure. And he challenged me a second time on it. Believed his tax dollars were funding the radio station, and that we shouldn't be taking a slant one way or the other. And again, it was a commentary that he was talking about. And I said, I'm happy to have any conversation with you, but if we're going to do this, we're going to do this based in fact. And the fact is, we're a privately owned company and we're not funded by the government. And so to your point, yeah, even in a situation where we have local news, there is, not in every case, but there are people like this gentleman who I had to convince his tax dollars weren't funding our company.
Yeah, I mean, there are stories that get floated about talking about, media rescue funds and things like that were largely designed for newspapers. But when you use the word media, that could be just about anything these
Well,
days.
that's right. Yeah. And to be fair to anybody, you know, I always treat any listener, whether it's this fella, people only half hear things. They don't necessarily pay attention to all details. So to your point, they hear media rescue funds and they believe that pertains to everybody. And I don't fault people for not necessarily getting right in the weeds and knowing everything about everything. And so every now and again, you got to take a phone call like that and explain it to somebody.
You got a good relationship with the labels. It's not like it's Chorus, Rogers, and Bell, and you can get like somebody in Toronto to send you the interview and you can cut and splice it together. You actually do the interviews. You got to interview Keith Urban recently.
I did, and I loved every moment of it. And credit to Keith Urban, because he has always, always made himself available. There's been 2 or 3 instances where Keith's been available for small town radio like us. And country's a bit of a unique beast in that way. But super, super experience. And he doesn't, like, if he's going to do it, he'll find out, okay, who am I going to be talking to and this, type of thing. And the guy's just a gem of a person.
I love birthdays. I love radio stations that read birthdays on the air. And you guys have, on the website, I can send you my birthday, and you guys will read my birthday on the air.
We will. And, it seems like it's one of those, old school radioisms, and the reality is it's still a big deal to people, especially kids, to hear their birthday on the radio. And, we sit and we bang our heads against the wall trying to figure out, how do we make radio cool for young people? Don't give up on stuff like that. For a little kid 7 years old, we need mom and dad's help to make sure they're in front of the radio and the whole thing. And probably mom and dad sent it in, so they'll do their part. And, that same little bit of magic a kid hearing their birthday on the radio is the same magic you and I might have felt when we were kids and got into radio. And so, again, it goes back to, let's not sharpen the knife that we're going to put in our own back by eliminating that experience for a kid. And if we want young people engaged in radio, that's a pretty good way to start. And, there's a fella that did our morning show. He retired a year ago. He was fabulous at it. And how do you make something like birthdays enjoyable for the rest of your cume whose name's not on that piece of paper? So they go through the local birthdays and that type of thing, and everybody's day's made. But then on the celebrity birthday side, the way they would play the game is the co-host would give him a descriptor of the celebrity whose birthday it was, and he had to try to figure out who it was. And so all of a sudden, birthdays became the ultimate play-along game. Even I, on the inside, if I were listening to our station in the Hortons drive-through, I'm trying to figure out who those celebrities are whose birthday. And so there are ways to take what might seem as a, old and tried radio bit and still breathe life into it.
No, it was one big contest was Z100 back in the day was the birthday contest that sort of vaulted them into number 1 in New York.
Yeah.
So, also about birthdays, what we have today, which we didn't have 20 years ago, and that's the ability to film the person listening to the birthday announcement and filming and capturing the reaction for social and getting, some extension out of that. Now you've got the listeners doing your social for you.
Oh gosh, yeah. And I mean, that's a great idea. I'd be a liar if I said that we've sat around a table and even I might steal that, because it's it's a really good idea. And you're right. Like, we kind of like to think of certain elements of our product in a Wikipedia way. It can be user fed, and you can be a part of this. And that's a great example of how.
We've been talking a little bit on this show about government and regulation and radio, and I know a lot of people find it boring, especially to Americans who are like, what's going on up there? But I think you're in a good position here because you deal with both, especially country, but as well you also deal with the more contemporary side to sort of see how this has evolved. You started programming music back in the 90s. when it was pretty cut and dried how it worked. We would play the record, the listener would listen to the record or the song on the radio, and then go and buy the album and hopefully buy tickets to the concert as well. It was a wonderful cycle.
Yeah, sure was.
And then Napster came along, and then the internet took over, and right around things began to really, really change. Probably 2009 or 10, when Canadian artists who largely successful would go find other places to record. And the current system that you're dealing with now. So tell me yours, as somebody who punches in the music every day, who programs it, who sees it, who deals in the metadata of MAPL. That's the Maple system. You need 2 out of the 4 of those to qualify as CanCon. What are some of the things you'd just like to see happen for the future?
What I would love, having just had one of our stations go through a CRTC review, performance review, I would love, even if we continue to work on what the model looks like for Canadian content, help us with the administrative burden. Because what happened is we got the note, you have 2 weeks to submit your package. Everything I do to help, create the product, make the product better, all of that had to go on the shelf for 2 weeks. Because I spent day and night getting everything in order to submit the package the way the commission would like to have it submitted. And those are the rules, and that's what we had to do. And I'll go so far as to say, hey, we're happy to provide it, but we would love it if the administrative burden were more streamlined. I think technology could help us on that. For example, Mediabase logs most radio stations in this country, what they do 24 hours a day. Can we not somehow use that service to help provide the commission with what it needs? And you've probably heard it a million times. The burden falls on radio to identify what's Canadian and what's not. There's not a database that exists. And our results came back pretty good. However, there was a song that they challenged, not that it wasn't Canadian. They said, we don't have sufficient evidence that it is Canadian on file. And so now I've got to spend more time trying to prove that Love is Fire by the Parachute Club is indeed a Canadian song. And I thought, I can't be the first person who's submitted that song on an audit as having played on our station. So how does that not exist somewhere?
Can we not get Lorraine Segato on the phone?
That's what another person suggested. Yeah.
I might have been having beers with that person at one point.
But, so what I would love in the short term is if that administrative burden were streamlined. I don't think, if again, we want Canadian radio to be a part of Canadian culture and to provide a service, 2 weeks of my time was not spent providing that service. It was, answering to that call. So it's a big challenge, and that's top of mind for me because I just lived.
Yeah. So metadata, right? So you mentioned Mediabase, and I think that's a great tool. I mean, if we had a central database where the metadata was properly input at the music level and the artist level, and you check off your MAPL and whatnot, and then that was a running live count through Mediabase that you could see whether you're tracking ahead or behind. This feels very easy to me.
It feels
this feels like a very 2006 solution, and here we are nearly 2026, and we're just kind of talking and figuring it out now. But it seems really easy, and if I feel I could write the code for this.
Oh my gosh, you probably make a lot of dough. But you're right. I think the answer in part is nothing's without its challenges. I mean, if Mediabase has a reporting issue or a transmission issue or a receiving issue, whatever it happens to be, nothing's perfect. I understand that. But certainly it seems like that's a piece of the answer right under our nose.
I would actually like to put forward that the CBC should be in charge of that.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I'd be open to hear that conversation.
Why not?
Yeah.
CBC is it's public broadcaster. We're making a music hub, and let's all drive it through there.
Interesting theory.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for.
That and a host of other things.
Yeah. Have you thought about podcast as a role for your company and how you would work that?
We have, there's a couple of employees here, a couple of girls that just have a great give and go together. They're very tight. They work together in our digital department. They have a podcast that they started a couple of years ago. It's called Babes of Quinte. And at first you might think that they've labeled themselves the Babes of Quinte, but in fact, the name of the brand was meant to reflect people in Quinte. Anybody can be a babe. And it's an endearing term for the people that they have. And what they really do a great job of is on a weekly basis, they'll pull somebody in and help that person tell their story, because it's amazing. You could pull anybody off the street. Everybody's got a story. And so, a lot of community leaders and people of note, small business people from all walks of lives, they'll pull in and share their story. And so, they've done that with success. And, it's become a very sought after product in the community. And you talked earlier about other ways that we can generate revenue. That one, albeit it's a local podcast, doesn't necessarily have the national scale. We've had advertising interest in that. So to answer the question, we are in that space. I think there's more for us to do in that space. But, again, we're a small but mighty team. And better than anybody with this podcast, which is wildly successful, that a lot of work goes into that. And so we see more of it in the future, but that's where we are with that right now. And they do a really good job of that.
Yeah. We're even discovering now that having numbers at a national scale is not enough to get you everybody paid for on the team. So,
well, and that's, I've heard it said, whether it's mathematically correct or not, that, 3% of the podcasts out there make 97% of the revenue. And so, that is absolutely a challenge. You can put a great product out there, but, finding the caramel secret of making the dough at that is the challenge.
Paul, this has been so much fun. I feel like I want to come back and work for you.
Oh my gosh, careful what you wish for. I appreciate the invitation, because when I open up Broadcast Dialogue every week, I love reading the dialogue. It's it's the day before Friday. I know the weekend's coming when I see Broadcast Dialogue in my inbox. I love that, but I always love going for the Sound Off podcast. And what I see sometimes, and I've always been curious, is that I'll see on social media, you'll be live with somebody, and I'll bump in, and I'll kind of jump in and see what you're up to live too.
Yeah, consume this by video, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, who's going to watch two bald guys talking about radio for like 45 minutes?
That's a great question. Other bald people who feel a sense of comfort with two others around. No, I really appreciate this. I enjoy hearing the podcast, and when you invited me on, I appreciated that. And it's nice to kind of, because I have some people ask me about this radio market often for the reasons you did as well. It's kind of unique, maybe us in Thunder Bay, where you've got two local operators kind of doing their thing, and our challenges are unique, but the opportunities are also still unique.
And a lot of people are only going to listen to it if they're driving up and down the 401.
Right.
Paul, thanks so much.
I appreciate it. And again, as Bill's sympathizers, we spend a lot of time in a particular group chat, either celebrating or commiserating. And so it's nice to be a part of this. Thanks, Matt.
Go Bills.
Be good, do good. God bless. Go Bills.
The Sound Off podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.